coming in hot. Elira's day started like any other in Millbrook, which meant it started wrong. She overslept because the rooster that usually woke her had apparently given up on the job weeks ago, and nobody had told her. She burned the first batch of porridge because she was thinking about the rooster instead of the pot. She stubbed her toe on the same warped floorboard she stubbed it on every single morning, the one old Mag kept meaning to fix and never did. By the time she'd pulled her apron on and unlocked the tavern's front door, she'd already decided this was going to be one of those days. It got worse from there. A merchant complained his ale was flat. It wasn't, but she poured him a new one anyway because arguing took more energy than she had. She dropped 2 copper coins while making change and watched them roll under a bench she was too tired to crawl beneath, so she just let them go. She caught the edge of a hot kettle wrong and hissed through her teeth, shaking her hand out, while old Mag glanced over, sighed the particular sigh of someone who had seen this exact thing happen 100 times, and went back to counting the till. Nobody was cruel to her. Nobody really noticed her either. That was Millbrook's tavern on a Tuesday. Elira wasn't clumsy, not really, and she wasn't unlucky in any grand or interesting way. She was just a young woman on her feet 12 hours a day, running on bad sleep and worse porridge, having exactly the kind of day where everything is a little bit harder than it should be. By the afternoon lull, she allowed herself one small comfort. She slipped into the pantry, broke off a corner of aged cheese from the block Mag kept for the good customers, and tucked it into her apron pocket. A tiny bribe to herself. Something to look forward to when her shift finally ended. She never got to eat it. She was halfway across the kitchen with an armful of dirty plates when something exploded out from beneath the flour barrel, a blur of grey fur and teeth, nose twitching straight toward the smell in her pocket. Elira didn't think. Her body simply took over. She screamed, the plates hit the floor in a crash of broken pottery, and she ran. The rat chased her out the back door and into the stable yard, snapping at her heels while she dodged past startled grooms and ducked under a hitching rail, her lungs already burning. She had no plan beyond one single screaming thought. Away! 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 She had no idea the sky above the yard had just gone dark with wings. She didn't see the shadow sweep across the cobblestones. She was too busy scrambling around a hay cart, and when her shoulder clipped a feed bucket and sent it crashing beneath the hooves of 3 tethered warhorses, she wasn't thinking about anything except the teeth behind her. The horses screamed and tore loose and thundered out into the street, and the wave of panicked animals scattered a crowd that had just started running from something else entirely, something enormous, something with claws that had been reaching for the ground a heartbeat before. The dragon's first strike hit only empty stone. It shrieked, furious, and beat its wings hard to climb back up onto the tavern roof and try again. 3 streets over, Elira heard none of it as a dragon's roar. To her, it was just more chaos in a town that had apparently decided to lose its mind at the exact same time she had. Somehow, without meaning to, she circled back toward the tavern, and in her panic, she ducked beneath a low awning to shake the rat off her trail. Her shoulder caught a support rope on the way through, one that happened to be tied, badly, to the very beam holding up the corner of roof the dragon had just landed on. The beam groaned, tilted and gave way, and half the roofline crashed down across the creature's folded wing. It roared and lunged back into the air, breathing a gout of flame across the thatch out of pure fury, and the tavern, the only place Elira had worked for 3 years, went up in fire behind her. She thought it was the rat's doing somehow. She didn't stop to ask questions. She ran straight through the smoke because the door she knew was that way, and the rat, impossibly, was still coming. She slammed the heavy kitchen door behind her without a glance back, and half a second later, a claw the size of a cartwheel crashed into the doorframe and buried itself beneath falling timber. For a moment, pinned under the wreckage, the dragon could not follow. Elira did not know she had just escaped a dragon. She only knew her legs were shaking, and the rat had found a gap under the door and was, somehow, still right behind her. By the time she stumbled into the open courtyard near the old bell tower, she had nothing left to give. Her legs trembled. Smoke rolled low across the stones. Around her, people were screaming a word she was too exhausted to make sense of, something that sounded like dragon. "Get down! Run!" But her whole world had narrowed down to the size of a rat's teeth and the pounding of her own heart. Above her, the beast tore itself free of the collapsed roof and turned its full attention downward, no longer distracted, no longer confused. Something about this one small human kept ruining every attack it made, and whatever passed for reason in a dragon's mind had decided that was no longer an accident. It rose into the smoke, wings spreading wide, and began its final dive. Elira never looked up. She had already spotted a stack of firewood against the courtyard wall and, with the rat gaining on her, scrambled up it without thinking, launching herself onto the back of a parked hay wagon just as the rat's claws swiped at empty air behind her. Her weight was enough. The wagon lurched, its brake block slipping, and it began rolling downhill toward the castle gate, with Elira clinging to the boards and the rat still chasing along behind it, refusing to give up. The wagon smashed into a siege cart at the bottom of the hill, which slammed sideways into a stack of barrels, which burst apart and sent dozens of them rolling and bouncing into the street directly beneath the dragon's dive. It had to wrench itself sideways to avoid being struck, missing Elira by less than the length of its own claw, and shrieked in a fury that rattled shutters 3 streets away. It circled back up into the smoke, wings beating hard, absolutely enraged that something this small, this insignificant, kept slipping away from every single attempt to end it. Elira, sprawled on the cobbles where she'd tumbled from the wrecked wagon, had no idea any of that had happened. She only knew the rat was still there, and the bell tower was still standing, and it looked, in that moment, like the only solid thing left in the world. She ran for it. She threw herself through the tower door and started up the stairs 2 at a time, her legs barely holding her, the rat's claws scrabbling on stone just behind her. Halfway up, her exhausted foot caught the edge of a worn step, and she pitched forward, arms flailing for anything to stop the fall. Her hand closed around a thick, sun-worn rope hanging down through the center of the stairwell. She had no idea what it was. She only knew she was about to fall, and she held on with both hands, dragging herself upright, gasping, her whole body shaking from the effort of simply staying on her feet. High above the tower, the dragon folded its wings for one last dive, jaws opening, aimed straight down through the open belfry at the top. The great bronze bell of Millbrook swung on its cradle and struck the dragon full across the skull the instant it dropped through the tower's open roof, mid-dive, wings spread, with nowhere left to turn. The sound was enormous. The dragon's shriek cut off mid-breath. It reeled, stunned, wings thrashing uselessly at the smoke, and then it began to fall. Past the shattered belfry, past the rooftops, down into the courtyard below, where a very small, very startled rat happened to be standing. It did not stand there for long. For a long moment, nothing in Millbrook moved. Smoke drifted. A loose shutter creaked somewhere down the street. The dragon lay sprawled across the broken courtyard stones, wings splayed, utterly still, and 2 floors up, Elira stood frozen with the bell rope still wrapped around both hands, staring down through the hole in the roof at what had just happened, understanding none of it. The rat was gone. That was the only thing her mind could hold on to. The rat, after an entire afternoon of pure misery, was finally gone. She let go of the rope and slid down onto the stairs, shaking, and for the first time since the flour barrel, nothing was chasing her. Below, the courtyard began to fill. Soldiers first, then guards, then what looked like half the town, all of them stopping dead at the sight of a dead dragon in the middle of Millbrook. And then slowly, disbelievingly, looking up at the girl standing in the ruined tower with rope burns fresh across her palms. Nobody asked if it had been an accident. Nobody imagined it could be. Within the hour, people were already calling it a trap, a masterstroke, The tavern girl who lured a dragon beneath the bell and brought the sky down on it with a single pull of the rope. Someone draped a cloak over her shoulders. Someone else was already telling the story to a growing crowd, and with every telling, the tale grew a little braver, a little more deliberate, a little less true. Elira sat in the wreckage and let them talk. She was too tired to correct anyone, and honestly, some small, worn-out part of her had simply stopped trying. It was old Mag who finally pushed through the crowd, took one look at her singed apron and shaking hands, and sat down beside her on the broken step without saying a word. That was the only thanks that felt real. Later that same evening, when someone in the crowd finally worked up the courage to ask the dragon slayer herself what had happened, Elira looked out at the wrecked tower, the dead beast below, and the raw marks across her palms, and gave the only true answer she had. "Thank goodness that dead dragon randomly fell out of the sky," she said quite sincerely, "and finally killed that awful rat." By winter, they were calling her Elira, the dragon slayer, in taverns from Millbrook to the coast, a fearless girl who had outwitted a beast 20 times her size through nerve and cunning and perfect timing. She never corrected that story either. It was easier to let them believe it, and some days, when her feet ached less than usual, she almost believed it herself. This has been a chapter from the Negsbane Iron series. Follow @Negsbane for more.